Off the dome, I'm gonna give you my top 5 players for Masters Toronto, starting with Patmen. Patmen is the glue, is the core of GE. Ever since back in PRX, ever since Masters Toronto, he has built building and building and building and being able to take on the leadership role. Besides IGLing, like being able to be a solid leader, a rock for GE is so crucial, and they would not be where they are without Patmen. And I feel like Patmen is the embodiment of Dennis Rodman. Now, I grew up playing basketball and I grew up watching basketball, and Dennis Rodman is a star player. Some people that don't really watch basketball may know about Dennis Rodman, but for those who don't know, Dennis Rodman is like the dirty grit and grind guy who, will set up his stars like Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen to shine, but when it's him time to shine, when it's his time, he can rise to the occasion. He may not score, but he'll grab a rebound, he'll get in somebody's face because he wants to be determined. And it's all about momentum. Valorant is all about momentum. It's all about energy. Patman is that dude that will provide that energy for the team, when they need it. And so oftentimes you'll see during in the middle of the games when they do the comms check, you'll be like, "Oh, I see this. It's a 1-3-1, or it's a they're splitting, or they'll just call out plays for the team because he's so vocal, because he's so aware of what's going on. And sometimes that will be somewhat of a detriment to him because he's so aware. It's only a matter of seconds before it happens. He calms it, and then somebody's dead. And I think it's so good to have Patman within GE because not only do you get to see him shine on his own, but you get to see his value as a player. You know and it's so hard to say that it's a detriment to say. It's so hard to say that being on PRX was a detriment to him because you have four fantastic players and five, including Patman, and for him to be able to be part of that roster and be part and have championship DNA and be able to carry it on to a new team, I feel like that's going to propel the team as long as they don't start off bad. Because as we see in Vietnam, once they started losing, it just became a trickling effect. And that also led into some of the group stage where, you know, going down the line, they'd win some, win two, and then they'll lose one, and then lose another one back to back. And then it wasn't until the last game, they already clinched, where, they were able to get the win, and that momentum brought them into playoffs and into be able to clinch into London. And Patman, again, is the core, is the embodiment of GE. Without Patman, there is no, star. There is no soul within GE. You have a bunch of really good players there, or a bunch of good role players, but there isn't really, that dude, the vibes dude, the person that is willing to push it down the line, willing to put the team on his back when he needs to. And the crazy thing is that, like, the team doesn't really do what I would personally do if I had Patman. I would make Patman the emphasis on the team because, as you can see earlier in stage one and in kickoff, that Patman, whenever he's on duelist, whenever he's in a position to thrive, he can frag, he can be able to carry the team. But sometimes, when it's the top teams like PRX, sometimes it just isn't your day. But him to put on performance after performance after performance, like, he is that dude to watch when it comes to Master Toronto, because he can be the difference maker from what a lot of people see as an average team GE into a team that can make top four. That leads me to my fourth person in my top 5 list, and that's Brawk. Brawk is that dude. He is literally, again, similar to Patman, another initiator player who is grit and grind and doesn't really, go outside of his role. He knows his role, and that is so crucial when it comes to team sports or team environments like Valorant, because you need dudes that are willing to be in their role and love their role. Brawk is so technical. He's willing to do the lineups. He's willing to do the practice to be able to do to be able to be excellent in his role, which not a lot of players are trying to do. Players are focusing on kills. Players are focusing on the game plan. They're focusing on their own performance, while Brawk doesn't really care about that. He's focused on his job and getting job done, like a blue collar worker. Brawk is that dude. Since we talk about basketball, best comparison I could say to Brawk is like a Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett, he doesn't really shoot that much trees. It wasn't until later in his career where he did a little bit of flashy things, but he was the grit and grind of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and later on to the Boston Celtics. Like he would get down, do the dirty work, and be a really good role player. He wouldn't be a superstar, like Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson, and later on into the Kobe Bryants and all that. He wasn't a superstar, but he's a well-known, respected NBA player because he would play to his role, and he would also do the extracurricular to be able to get the vibes. And sometimes you gotta be a little chippy with the other team so you can make the team more alive. Like you gotta show that you care. And once you show that you care, then other teams will say, hey, damn, like this dude, he's willing to go through some real stuff to be able to win. Like, if the team is down, like Brawk isn't necessarily the vocal person, but I'm willing to do the work. He's the Kevin Garnett of NRG. That leads me to my third. That leads me to my third person, and something is probably one of the best players that has ever played Valorant, or one of the best duelists that has ever played Valorant. In terms of like, you can see that he has so much like flashiness and so much like confidence within his gameplay, but the issue that comes with something is that sometimes something doesn't show up in some of the big games. Like there'd be games against like really tough opponents like T1, or late back in the day like Gen G, where something would kind of like shy away. Like he would kind of be the average player in Paper X. When it's a team full of superstars, some things would be like in the middle of the pack rather than like being on the top of the pack. And usually, you would associate either something or Jing. And then in this case, Jing has been the better person, but I think it comes down to something. I think it comes down to something because in Masters Toronto, it's going to be the story of if something shows up. Because Jing can fag out, throughout the whole tournament, but what's going to get them across the line is if something can improve his form and also prove it against the field. Because there's going to be people that have seen all the videos, or everybody kind of expects, oh, they've been playing how the meta is going to shape out. But is it going to be a thing of where they can continue the form that they're having? Because with the form that they had in stage one, then they're obviously going to win. But it's just a matter of, with the crowd environment and, the adversity that they're going to face, maybe a slow start. Are they going to be able to show that form and bounce back or just hit the floor running? And it's just going to be, out of all the players in Paper X, it's going to be up to something if they decide and if they eventually do win the whole thing. Hong Kong, Brawk, Forsaken, and Dompy all have finals MVP before something. And if it isn't the time now, then it's never going to happen. This is time for something to be able to get that finals MVP. And here's the thing, that there's two more players that can surpass something at his peak. And number two is Primmie. Primmie is probably the biggest prodigy when it comes to Valorant. One of the youngest players to be probably the most prolific. Your player's favorite player wants to be Primmie. Like the way that Primmie plays, almost everybody that watches and plays Valorant wants to be like, because not only is he so like can be flashy with his op and his rifling, but he's just so consistent. Like, whenever it's a 1v1, you're always thinking, okay, Primmie's gonna win this. And I think that's gonna play into the field, and I think it's so detrimental, I believe it's so important that Primmie has to play, because that's the whole way that Full Sense is set up. Primmie has to excel. Primmie has to, be that guy. Obviously, they have their supporting cast that, can step up, but the whole game plan is around Primmie. And without Primmie, then, they just become a average team. And so going into the group stage and, eventually into playoffs, it's up to Primmie to ooh and ah and dazzle the crowd, with his gameplay. And it's just a matter of how he reacts to the crowd and the environment and the pressure, because, you only got, 2 games, by the second game, you hope you don't get that one loss. And again, Valorant is so pivotal when it comes to momentum. Valorant emphasizes momentum and form, because if Full Sense hits the ground running, then they're probably an unstoppable train. It's just a matter of who they end up facing in playoffs because, nobody's going to want to pick full sense if Primmie is popping off, hitting a 30 bomb on whoever they're playing, or well, in this first game, they're going to play foot. But if he drops 30 and they go into the next game and he just stomps them out, whoever they play, then nobody's going to want to play full sense. Primmie is the Wemby of Valorant. And you see it now, Wemby is thriving. It took him 1 or 2 years to be able to settle in. I think he's in his third year now. And Primmie is kind of settling, at the end of his first year going into this year. It's pretty much, a young player. And it's the same thing with Wemby. Wemby is so young and he's a superstar. And it's just a matter of getting to the playoffs and showing that you are the star, you are that dude. It wasn't until this finals where the Spurs ended up playing the Thunder that showed the world, okay, Wemby is legit. He's that dude. He's going to become a superstar. When everybody thought, oh, I don't know who's going to be the face after LeBron, it's Wemby. And everybody's going to think the same about Primmie, especially if he pops out. If they go through the group stage and into playoffs, it's probably going to cement Primmie as, one of the top 5 players in VCT, regardless. And that's the expectation. That's what, anything less is a failure because there's so much potential that's riding on Primmie that it's just a matter of how they perform. And it's so hard to say, that, Valorant, it's a team sport. You can't rely on one player, but it's probably their best shot of making it into top 4 at Masters is Primmie. And last, the number 1 player is Neon. Without Neon, without all these top 5 players, the teams wouldn't be anywhere near where they are right now. And Neon is probably the biggest crucial part. And you saw it back in kickoff because as soon as they added Neon, then they started to make drastic improvements where everybody was like, oh, Lev might actually be, a really good team, like, top 3 team, Masters qualifying team. And next thing you know, after they get, a couple reps in Santiago, I'm pretty sure they're scrimming. They're, practicing against the top teams, against, Dambi and Nongshim. They're practicing. They had some time. The worst thing you want for this team as an opponent is to have some time. They got some time, and then they started cooking, and they started getting, top 2 in Americas. They almost beat G2, which, probably have been a really huge accomplishment if they did, because, G2 has pretty much been undefeated since last year when it comes to the finals besides kickoff. Neon is a crucial factor to Lev, even though they have Sato, Spike, Blows, and King. He's such a crucial part because not only is he set up to thrive when he is a duelist, but whenever he's on supportive roles like Smokes, he's able to be self-sufficient. And also, Smokes, Chamber, whenever he's on Chamber, he's so self-sufficient because he's able to get a pick. Whenever he's in a 1v1, shit, if I see a 1v1 on Neon and Neon the player and Primmie, I'm probably taking Neon. If I see an op, Neon's probably winning that. And the most impressive thing that I've seen about Neon is not only his Chamber, but that he makes little to zero mistakes. He's a rookie player, just came in within a couple months. He's probably the most elastic player. He's able to stretch, flex a little bit, able to pop off, but also stay in a lane, not be too passive, not be too aggressive. He's just right in the middle. And I feel like he deserves so much praise. He is a star in the making because he's literally that dude. He's literally that dude for Lev. And even though the stats may not be flashy in the sense of Primmie, where, Primmie's getting a 3K, 4K, 5, or, an ace, where Neon, he's getting 1 or 2 minimum around. And I think he deserves so much credit for that. It's so exciting to see Lev because one of the players I also want to watch is Sato, because Sato has always been that player where, whenever he was on M80 and some of the other teams, everybody was like, oh, I want to see Sato on an international stage because, especially during Americas in the final, he was just standing up, wanting that audience, and for it to finally be in a big audience stage, the biggest moment, those two, well, the whole team is just gonna thrive. They're gonna embrace the energy because they're so young and they're so like aware of the moment, but also like be so joyful because a lot of people, a lot of players, I lived through it, not to the highest moments, but being able to put yourself in pressure situations. Do people enjoy it? Do people take them too seriously? Do they make fun of it? Do they, can they laugh? Like, there's certain teammates, there's certain people that will feel the pressure and just like not vibe with the team. Like there'll be one person that will go into the locker room or go into take a break and they'll just be like down on themselves. And it's just up to the team and the players to be like, oh, like bro, like it's just a game. Like, come on, man. Like we have to have like good flow, good energy, and that's how these teams make a run.